There was a time when this corridor would have been deafening. Music from 5 different stores bleeding together, kids weaving through crowds with pretzels and plastic bags, a Saturday ritual for an entire town. Now it's midnight. The food court is dark. One fluorescent tube near the ceiling flickers like it's trying to remember how to stay alive, and an escalator hums steadily, carrying no one, up to a second floor lined with gates and for lease signs. The only footsteps belong to a lone security guard. They echo down a hallway built for thousands, bounce off marble tiles and glass railings that once promised a future of endless spending and endless comfort. The air is still climate-controlled, the muzak is long gone, and the cameras keep watching a mall that no longer exists, like sentries guarding a vanished empire. This is not a horror movie set. This is real estate, insured, financed, and technically open for business. America did something no society in history has ever done. It built more shopping space per person than any other country on Earth, layer after layer of climate-controlled dreams stretching from one suburb to the next. By the mid-2010s, there were roughly 24 square feet of retail space for every American, a landscape of indoor cathedrals to money and comfort, where the middle-class life was supposed to play out under skylights and sale banners forever. Now, hundreds of those cathedrals sit dark, guarded, and quietly decaying. From the outside, they still look massive and confident. Inside, ceiling tiles sag from old leaks, escalators rust at the edges, and faded logos cling to storefronts like ghosts that never got the memo. Behind every dead mall is a broken promise. The jobs that anchored a town, the tax revenue that funded schools, parks, and police. The place where families took graduation photos and Santa pictures, now reduced to a drafty corridor and a security guard checking doors that no one tries to open. These ruins were not accidents. They were the logical endpoint of a growth-at-all-costs model, an era when developers overbuilt on cheap money, chains signed leases on every corner, and financial engineers carved malls into mortgage-backed products so complex that the people shopping inside could never have understood who really owned the floor beneath their feet. When the crowds left, the investors moved on, wrote down the losses, and found the next opportunity. The locals, meanwhile, were left with rotting monuments to a middle-class dream that had quietly expired. It's an example of what happens when an entire country treats consumption as destiny. From climate-controlled dreams to climate-controlled ruins, this is a story of power, wealth, and abandonment. At times inspiring, and at times chilling in what it reveals about how value is created and destroyed. So let me take you back to the rise of the American mall, then walk you through the dead ones America left to rot. Meet the people who still live and work in their shadows, and finally uncover who actually profits when a mall dies. There was a time when the American dream did not end at a mall parking lot. It began there. Fresh asphalt, chrome bumpers, and a glowing sign promising air conditioning, free parking, and everything a rising middle class could want under one enormous roof. Let me take you back to the late 1940s and 1950s, when millions of veterans came home with GI Bills in their pockets and a fierce determination to give their families a better life. Cheap federally backed mortgages, exploding car ownership, and new highways cutting through farmland turned open fields into subdivisions almost overnight. Cul-de-sacs replaced tenements, driveways replaced streetcars, and on the suburban horizon, developers saw something else taking shape. A new empire of consumption waiting to be built. The enclosed mall was the crown jewel of that empire. Climate-controlled in winter and summer, shielded from rain, crime, and the unpredictable chaos of downtown streets, it promised a safe, predictable, almost frictionless world. Anchor stores like Sears and J.C.Penney at each end, a gleaming corridor of brands between them, and in the middle, a food court where a teenager could spend $3 and feel rich for an afternoon. It wasn't just shopping, it was choreography. The lighting, the music, the fountains, all designed to slow your walk, open your wallet, and keep you there for hours. By the mid-2010s, the scale of that project was staggering. The United States had roughly 24 to 25 square feet of retail space per person, far more than any other major country on Earth. Think about what that means. Every man, woman, and child effectively assigned a small room of pure consumption, backed by billions of dollars in loans, tax breaks, and pension money, all betting that Americans would keep driving to the mall forever. It's an example of what happens when optimism, cheap credit, and faith in endless growth reinforce each other without pause. But the power of the mall was never just economic. For an entire generation, it was emotional infrastructure. First jobs behind the register at Sears, first paychecks spent 2 doors down, first dates wandering past the same 3 jewelry stores, prom photos taken by a fountain that only existed to sell more shoes. Parents pushed strollers under skylights. Retirees walked laps before opening. Teenagers used the food court as a training ground for adulthood. These buildings were memory factories, pressing the life of the American middle class into glossy tile and fluorescent light. So if malls were once the beating heart of suburbia, what happens when that heart stops? Not with an explosion, but with a slow, quiet failure. One anchor closing, then another, then whole wings going dark while the escalators still hum. In the next part, that's where the story goes, into the long, eerie moment when the crowds leave, the doors stay unlocked, and the empire of consumption begins to rot in place. There was a time when a mall wasn't just a building, it was a blueprint for how America thought life should work. You didn't just walk into a shopping center, you entered a machine designed to take families, time, and money, and turn them into growth that never stopped. Let me take you back to that layout, because it wasn't random. Picture 2 or 3 hulking department stores at the edges, Sears on one end, J.C.Penney or Macy's on the other, maybe a Dillard's or Montgomery Ward holding down a third side. Between them, a spine of smaller inline shops, lined up like tributaries feeding into those big box rivers. Above, skylit atriums made the indoors feel like a controlled, permanent spring, while food courts sat in the center as noisy social hubs, where pizza grease and orange Julius sugar glued teenagers to plastic chairs. Outside, an ocean of parking wrapped the whole empire in asphalt. Not a few rows, acres. Enough space that every Saturday could feel like Black Friday if the machine worked. Highways funneled cars to the ring roads. Ring roads funneled drivers to the entrances, and every entrance was another chance to be captured by the climate-controlled dream. The traffic logic was ruthless and elegant. Anchors weren't just tenants, they were engines. Sears sold appliances, tools, and the fantasy of middle-class wealth. J.C.Penney promised reliable clothes for the whole family. Macy's added a sheen of urban glamour. Their job wasn't only to make profit inside their own walls. Their job was to pull bodies through the doors, then spill them into jewelry counters, shoe stores, and kiosks hawking pagers, beepers, cell phone cases, and pretzels shaped like cartoon infinity signs. Financially, the shell of this world was just as engineered. Developers usually kept ownership of the mall itself, the corridors, the parking, the common areas, the anchors, the big names on the facade, often paid the lowest rent per square foot, locked in with sweetheart deals and long leases, because their presence raised the value of everything around them. The real money came from the middle, the national chains and local boutiques paying higher rents, common area fees, marketing charges, all justified by the promise of that anchor-driven foot traffic. Inside, the mall functioned as a controlled ecosystem. Music was calibrated to be familiar but not distracting. Lighting stayed bright enough to feel safe, dim enough to blur the passage of time. The temperature hovered in the same narrow band year-round, a quiet guarantee that no matter what the weather did to the parking lot, the interior climate of consumption would never change. Even the scents were curated, from popcorn and cinnamon at the entrances to perfume clouds drifting from department store doors. Because everything was so tightly tuned, everything was fragile. When one anchor closed, the foot traffic map shifted. When a highway rerouted, the Saturday surge thinned. When demographics moved on, the tenants in the middle began to suffocate. And once the numbers on those spreadsheets stopped matching the dream, the machine didn't explode. It began to quietly unravel. What happens when the music keeps playing? The air still hums, but the crowds never come back. In the next part, that's where the story goes, into the moment when the blueprint for endless growth becomes a blueprint for decay, and the mall starts eating itself from the inside out. The machine didn't explode, it just went slightly off rhythm. At first, the cracks in the marble weren't cinematic, they were quiet, almost polite. A darkened storefront at the far end of a secondary corridor. A for-lease sign that stayed up a little too long. Weeknight hours trimmed back so the gates came down at 8 instead of 9, explained away as seasonal. There was a time when a mall manager would panic over one empty space, rushing to paper the glass, repaint the trim, keep the illusion of fullness alive. But as the 1990s bled into the 2000s, some of those corners stayed empty. The fountain still ran, the escalators still hummed, but behind the soundtrack of normal life, small economies were slipping. Roof leaks were patched with buckets for a weekend, then for a month, then for a season. A cracked tile in the food court waited for the next budget cycle, then the next. Outside the climate-controlled empire, the ground was moving. On the edge of town, big-box power centers sprouted on cheaper land, surrounded by oceans of asphalt. Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Costco. One building, one logo, one promise. Lower prices, huge selection, no pretense. Because of their scale and relentless focus on money and efficiency, they could undercut the mall on almost everything that wasn't about image. The families who once treated Saturday at the mall as default began to peel away, not with a protest, but with a quiet recalculation at the kitchen table. Because of that drift, anchor stores inside the mall felt the pressure first. Sears, JCPenney. Macy's fought to keep traffic flowing through those polished entrances. But every cart pushed across a supercenter parking lot was another tiny vote against the old model. It's an example of what happens when a new kind of power grows in the open, while the old one keeps rearranging its window displays, insisting nothing has changed. Then came the threat that, at first, did not look like a threat to marble floors at all. E-commerce arrived as a niche habit, almost a hobby. There was a time when online shopping meant ordering a book, a CD, maybe a weird cable for a computer. The mall barely noticed. But every frictionless purchase trained people. Free shipping, reviews, endless choice at midnight. One more package on the doorstep, one less casual trip. Just to look around. The empire was being rewired from the living room outward. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the slow leak turned into a breach. Because credit froze and consumer confidence collapsed, marginal malls, The ones already wobbling lost their last lifelines. Tenants went dark. Expansion plans died on contact. Loans tied up in complex securities left owners with less control and cities with fewer options. Yet even as vacancy climbed, even as food courts thinned out, press releases still talked about repositioning and upside. If the cracks were this visible, this early, why did so many investors, cities, and owners keep pretending the marble was still flawless? So let me take you back to a place where those cracks didn't just show up in quarterly reports. They broke through the ceiling. They shattered the glass. They turned a local landmark into a warning sign you could see from the highway. Rolling Acres Mall, Akron, Ohio. There was a time when that name meant escape. Opened in the mid-1970s with 5 big anchor stores, indoor trees, skylights, and soft carpeting, it sold more than clothes and appliances. It sold safety. For suburban families trying to put distance between themselves and the old industrial city, this was the climate-controlled dream. No rain, no snow, no street crime, just light music, clean bathrooms, and endless ways to spend money. On weekends, the place felt like an empire under glass. Holiday seasons turned the parking lots into oceans of cars, headlights stretching out into the dark. Inside, Santa's throne had a line that wrapped past 3 stores. Teenagers treated it as the default setting for life. You could get dropped off at 10 a.m., wander from arcade to food court to record shop, watch a movie, circle back to the fountains, and finally get picked up at 9 p.m. without ever seeing the sky again. But because this story is one of rise and fall, the peak was also the turning point. Newer malls opened closer to growing suburbs. Power centers with big box chains and cheaper rents siphoned off both tenants and shoppers. National retailers chased higher income zip codes. As Akron's economy shifted and demographics changed, the mall's original customer base moved, aged, or lost spending power. Perceptions of crime crept in, sometimes from real incidents, sometimes from local gossip that traveled faster than any official statement. Anchor stores started to blink out. One department store closed, then another. Each loss meant fewer reasons to visit, less traffic for the small shops, more dark gates pulled down at 5 p.m. Because of that slow erosion of power at the top, the whole ecosystem underneath began to rot. Security tightened even as budgets shrank. Maintenance slipped. A place built to feel effortless suddenly felt tired. Then came the end game. After foreclosure and final closure, Rolling Acres didn't quietly disappear. It lingered. Vandals smashed skylights. Copper thieves gutted the walls. Rain and snow poured in, turning plush carpets into moldy swamps. Sunlight cut through broken glass and lit up dead planters and abandoned kiosks like a post-apocalyptic diorama. Urban explorers filmed the wreckage, posting videos of escalators frozen in mid-climb and food courts taken over by peeling paint and silence. Those clips went viral. Rolling Acres stopped being a local disappointment and became a national symbol of retail ruin, a shorthand image for everything that had gone wrong with overbuilt American shopping culture. At times inspiring and at times chilling, the before and after photos looked like 2 different planets. But here's the uncomfortable question. Was Rolling Acres a freak accident, or was it an example of what happens when a community's central gathering place is built on assumptions that quietly expire? Because if it was a warning, it wasn't the last one. There was a time when a mall died because people stopped showing up. Now, many malls died because a spreadsheet somewhere decided they were finished long before the last Orange Julius closed. To see how that happened, let me take you back to the quiet revolution in mall money. Commercial Mortgage-Backed Securities, or CMBS. A developer would build a gleaming new center, borrow tens or hundreds of millions against it. Then that loan would be chopped into thin slices, bundled with dozens of others, and sold off to pension funds, insurance companies, and hedge funds scattered across the globe. Not only was your local mall a weekend hangout, it was also a tiny line of code inside a $500 million bond deal, traded by people who would never learn how to pronounce the town's name. On paper, it looked safe. The models said Americans loved malls, car culture was eternal, and anchors like Sears or JCPenney would always pull steady crowds. Spreadsheets projected 15, 20, even 30 years of stable occupancy, rising rents, and slowly climbing property values. Those numbers assumed no Amazon, no demographic shifts, no anchors collapsing under their own outdated empires of beige carpeting and fluorescent lighting. The future was neat, clean, and color-coded. Reality, of course, was messier. As e-commerce grew and anchors failed, foot traffic thinned. A mall that had been financed on the promise of endless growth suddenly faced vacancies, falling sales, and tenants begging for rent reductions. But the debt it carried was still priced for a golden age that had quietly ended. In the cold logic of CMBS, that gap didn't produce soul-searching. It produced a calculation. When a property's value slid below the amount of its loan, some owners treated it the way a hedge fund treats a bad position. They mailed the keys to the special servicer, stopped putting in capital, and walked away. No dramatic town hall, no tearful farewell to the food court. Just a decision that this particular asset, in this particular community, no longer justified the money or the headache. His story is one of ruthless triage, repeated across dozens of shells where families once spent entire Saturdays. Here, the misalignment becomes brutal. For local residents, the mall had been a social center, a climate-controlled town square where teenagers discovered independence and grandparents walked laps to keep their hearts going. For distant investors, it was one line among thousands, a tiny fraction of a portfolio whose job was to generate yield, not meaning. When the yield disappeared, so did the patience. And here's the pattern interrupt. In many cases, there was no villainous mayor, no dramatic vote to let the place rot. The decision happened in a conference room, over coffee and quarterly reports, far from the cracked parking lot and the weeds pushing through the asphalt. It's an example of what happens when the life of a community asset is governed by models that never once ask who's left staring at the locked doors. Because once the spreadsheet moves on, the building doesn't. It just sits there, waiting for whoever comes next. So let me take you back to what whoever comes next really looks like. Not a visionary developer with blueprints and fanfare. Just a Tuesday afternoon in a half-alive mall where the lights are still on, the music still plays, and almost no one is listening. There was a time when this place roared on weekends. Parking lots overflowing, families circling for a spot, teenagers orbiting the food court like planets around a fluorescent sun. Now the automatic doors sigh open to a hollow echo. The same pop playlist leaks from ceiling speakers, but without the cushion of crowds, every note feels exposed, bouncing off gated storefronts and rolling down an empty concourse that was built for thousands and gets dozens. On the directory board, entire wings have been erased into beige rectangles. The map still shows a Sears that died 6 Christmases ago. The "You Are Here" star feels less like orientation and more like a warning. In the gaps between the ghosts, a few survivors cling on. A nail salon with harsh white light and a handwritten "cash-only" sign. A local cell phone repair shop with a glass case full of cracked screens. The owner hunched over a circuit board, pretending not to notice the emptiness pressing against the glass. These are not the national chains that once gave the mall its empire glamour. These are people who signed long leases in better years and do not have the money to move. Every month, the foot traffic shrinks, the regulars disappear, and the rent check feels less like a business expense and more like a bet against gravity. Because when the anchors left, they didn't just take their logos. They took the river of bodies that fed everyone else. Look closer, and the decay is polite but relentless. Promotional posters still promise Summer 2014 style event, in colors the sun has already drained. A children's play area sits roped off, the cartoon characters smiling through a thin film of dust. The central fountain, once a wishing well for spare change and teenage dreams, has been drained and filled with artificial plants to save on maintenance costs. The fake greenery is the healthiest thing in sight. The people have changed too. There was a time when going to the mall meant getting dressed up, putting on cologne, making a night of it. Now the regulars move through in hoodies and work boots, eyes down, earbuds in. This is no longer a destination. It's a shortcut between bus stops, a climate-controlled hallway you endure on the way to the one open pharmacy, an obligation for those still loyal to the last discount clothing store hanging on by its clearance rack. And then there is the food court. Designed for hundreds, ringed with shuttered counters and faded menu boards, it hosts a single elderly couple at a plastic table. They eat slowly in near silence, the only soundtrack the soft buzz of tired fluorescent lights and the distant wheeze of an escalator humming to nowhere. It's an example of what happens when a place built for endless growth outlives the story that created it, and yet refuses to admit that the party finally ended. Because if this is what half-dead looks like, the question becomes, what happens when the lights actually go out? When the public doors lock and the last car pulls out of the lot, the mall doesn't fall asleep. It changes shifts. There was a time when these buildings needed full security teams just to control holiday crowds. Now, a single guard might patrol 1 million square feet of silence, driving an aging golf cart past darkened storefronts that once printed money for an entire region. Let me take you back to that night shift. One person, maybe two, watching a wall of flickering CCTV monitors that cover more ground than some small towns, tracking motion not for shoppers, but for shadows. A camera catches a bird that somehow nested in the rafters. Another shows a lone sedan circling the lot for no good reason. Another stares at an anchor store that died years ago, yet still gets checked every hour, because if something goes wrong in that blacked-out cube, no one outside will notice until the smoke reaches the sky. In those blind corners and forgotten service corridors, other lives move in. Squatters slip in through loading docks and emergency exits that no longer quite latch, claiming back offices, storage closets, even old dressing rooms as temporary bedrooms. There's a family resemblance to the old mall crowds, but the currency has changed. Power outlets, working sinks, a door that locks from the inside. Teenagers find their own way in, through propped open fire doors or shattered skylights, chasing viral TikToks and urban exploration clips instead of weekend sales. They film slow walks through dead food courts, joke about liminal spaces, then jump when a motion light snaps on over a closed sparrow. Because utilities are expensive even for a dying empire, owners start carving the building into zones of light and darkness. Whole wings go dark to save on electricity and HVAC. Gates pulled shut. Motion sensors quietly disabled in areas that no longer generate rent. A few lit corridors remain like islands in a sea of black, connecting the last open tenants. Maybe a DMV office, a dialysis clinic, a discount gym with its own exterior door. The result is a place that is technically open, yet feels abandoned, where a single working escalator hums through 3 floors of vacancy. Behind that eerie choreography is a very practical fear. These structures were never meant to sit empty. Long corridors, hidden stairwells, and flat roofs become hazards when no one is watching. Owners weigh the cost of full-time security, fire inspections, and insurance against the risk of a squatter's candle starting a blaze, copper thieves ripping out wiring, or a teenager falling through a skylight during a midnight dare. It's an example of what happens when a monument to consumer wealth turns into a liability spreadsheet overnight. And yet, in some of these dead malls, the lights still hum, the cameras still watch, and a handful of people still move through the shadows. Security guards, squatters, late-night workers, and visitors who don't appear on any lease. They're not there to shop. They're there for something else entirely, and that's where the story turns darker. They move like ghosts through a kingdom that no longer recognizes them. Flashlight in one hand, camera in the other, respirator tight across the face. They step over shattered glass and peeling linoleum with the quiet focus of surgeons. This is the modern pilgrim to the retail afterlife, the urban explorer. No shopping bags, no receipts, just the old code passed down in forums and Discord chats. Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. In a world obsessed with owning more, their whole story runs on not touching anything at all. They are drawn to these empty empires of money and power the way earlier generations were drawn to castles and cathedrals. Let me take you back to one of their videos. The camera glides down a dead corridor, past security gates rusted half shut. A food court appears, but the neon is gone. Only faded outlines of logos cling to the walls. Mold blooms across the carpet in slow, patient circles. Above, a skylight is spiderwebbed with cracks, and a single shaft of sunlight cuts through the dust like a spotlight on a stage where the actors never showed up. There was a time when this kind of footage would have been a glitch in the local news. Now it is a full genre. Slow, drifting shots. Long, unbroken walks. Down escalators, humming to nowhere. The soundtrack is rarely loud. Ambient drones, haunting piano, maybe the distant drip of water echoing through the atrium. Millions watch. Comment sections fill with people saying they remember this exact mall, or one that looked just like it, where their family spent Saturday nights under fluorescent skies. The emotional pull is powerful. Part nostalgia, part trespass. Viewers are chasing the ghost of a childhood where the mall meant safety, climate control, and endless options. At the same time, there is the forbidden thrill of seeing a place that was designed to be crowded rendered completely empty. No sales, no security guards in sight. Just the bones of an economy that promised endless wealth and finally ran out of breath. Because of that draw, the smallest channels can suddenly explode. One viral walkthrough turns an obscure dead mall into a destination. Explorers drive hours to reach it, slipping through loading docks, prying open side doors, crawling under half-collapsed fences. Owners respond the only way they know how. More boards, more cameras, more security contracts for buildings that no longer earn a cent. Then, a pattern interrupt. Every once in a while, the camera turns and catches something alive. A squatter's mattress, a lone worker replacing bulbs in a hallway no one uses, a security guard's flashlight slicing through the dark. The mood shifts from dreamy nostalgia to immediate danger, at times inspiring and at times chilling, as if the mall itself is waking up. It's an example of what happens when the ruins of consumerism become one of the internet's favorite haunted house attractions. What does it say about a culture when its most shared images are not new empires of glass and steel, but the quiet, rotting shells of where the money used to flow? There was a time when the future of American shopping had a very specific address: Harvey, Illinois. 20 miles south of Chicago, wrapped in highways and hope, stood Dixie Square Mall, a climate-controlled dream that opened in the mid-1960s with the confidence of a young empire that believed the money would always flow. On paper, it had everything: department store anchors, polished terrazzo floors, bright skylights pouring artificial daylight onto families pushing strollers, and teenagers orbiting the record shop. But the mall life window was short. By the late 1970s, crime, white flight, and a shrinking local tax base were already pulling Harvey into poverty. Tenants left, anchors closed, and the air-conditioned promise of endless wealth quietly suffocated. Doors were locked. Corridors went dark. Dixie Square died before most malls even hit their stride. Then Hollywood called. Let me take you back to 1979. The mall is already dead to shoppers, but to the producers of the Blues Brothers, it is perfect. A giant, empty playground waiting to be destroyed. Overnight, a failed commercial experiment becomes a film set. Cameras roll as stunt drivers launch squad cars through plate glass, plow through kiosks, and race down abandoned concourses under flickering fluorescent lights. This place has everything, a character jokes on screen as police vehicles detonate displays that once promised 20% off. It is retail apocalypse as slapstick, and the mall is immortalized not for its grand opening, but for its demolition in the name of entertainment. When the crew left, no miracle followed. The wrecked storefronts were not rebuilt. The promised repairs never really happened. Dixie Square was handed back to reality, a half-shattered corpse of a mall, open to the elements, left to rot for decades. Scavengers stripped copper, smashed drywall, pulled ceiling tiles for resale. Graffiti crept across every surface. With each year, the building collected more broken glass, more mold, more police reports. Because there was no single clear owner with both money and motivation, the property slid into a legal and political quagmire. Title disputes, unpaid taxes, and a tangle of lenders made it hard to know who was truly in charge. Environmental contamination from asbestos and aging mechanical systems turned demolition into a multi-million-dollar problem. Local officials were trapped between the optics of letting a ruin fester beside residential streets and the brutal math of paying to erase a private failure with public funds. So Dixie Square lingered. Lawsuits were filed. Redevelopment plans were announced. Press conferences promised townhomes, big box stores, even a comeback. Nothing stuck. The mall outlived its purpose, its brief moment of Hollywood fame, and any rational economic logic. It became a magnet for crime, fires, and urban explorers chasing the exact images that made it legendary in the first place. It's an example of what happens when an empire of consumption collapses faster than the laws, loans, and land records wrapped around it. And Dixie Square was not alone. Across the country, other malls were beginning the same slow fall into limbo, even as their parking lots still gleamed under sodium lights. Across those still gleaming parking lots, the question quietly shifted from "What's on sale?" to "Who's paying for this?" Because when an empire of consumption falls, the receipts don't vanish. They just get handed to different people. There was a time when working at the mall meant stability. Retail employees built entire lives on those rotating schedules, knowing December would be chaos, but August would be slow and predictable. Then anchors pulled out. Hours were cut, and the same workers who once managed crowds now spent shifts folding the same unsold shirts in empty corridors. For many, the final notice came as an email, a locked door, or a handwritten sign promising reopening soon that never actually arrived. Managers had it worse. Some had spent 20, even 30 years in the same building, rising from stockroom to store leader, learning every leak in the roof and every regular by name. Their reward for decades of loyalty was often a few weeks of severance, a box for their family photos, and a reminder to mail back the keys. Security guards watched their job transform in slow motion, from breaking up fights on Friday nights to patrolling silent wings, chasing leaks, copper thieves, and the occasional urban explorer. The paycheck stayed low, but the feeling changed, from managing energy to guarding absence. Outside those locked entrances, local governments were discovering their own hangover. Many cities had treated the mall as a tax engine that would run forever, using sales tax to fund schools, repave roads, and expand police forces. When foot traffic died, that money evaporated, but the costs did not. Now there were legal fights over unpaid property taxes, debates about who should board up broken entrances, and line items in city budgets for fencing, patrols, and endless redevelopment studies that led nowhere. Meanwhile, on conference calls far from the food court, the tone was different. Lenders marked down loans. Equity partners wrote off their stake. Capital, diversified across dozens or hundreds of properties, simply moved on to the next hot asset class. For them, the dead mall was a line on a spreadsheet, unfortunate but manageable, buffered by distance and by a portfolio where winners canceled out losers. No one was guarding empty escalators for $14 an hour on those calls. Caught in the middle were the small business tenants, independent jeweler, sneaker reseller, nail salon, family-run restaurant. They had poured money into build-outs, signage, specialized equipment, and inventory calibrated to that exact corridor. When anchors left and traffic collapsed, they were trapped in leases they couldn't easily break, in spaces no one wanted to sublet, in a building the public had quietly written off. Relocating meant paying again for everything they had already bought once. Let me take you back to those childhood memories of the mall, the carousel, the fountain, the first job, the first date. The mall era did create real prosperity and real memories, at times inspiring and at times chilling in its scale. But when the music stopped, the bill did not land on everyone equally. Some walked away lighter. Others were left holding the keys to a kingdom no one visited. And what happened next, when those hollow kingdoms were finally too empty to ignore, would reveal an even darker calculation. Those hollow kingdoms did not just sit there quietly. They kept taking. Even after the last food court tray was stacked, the last carousel light clicked off, the dead mall stayed plugged into the life of the city, quietly draining money and power from far beyond its cracked parking lot. There was a time when a mall was a fiscal engine, the way a steel mill or a port once was. Property taxes poured in from acres of climate-controlled retail. Sales taxes skimmed off every impulse buy, and spin-off development wrapped around it like a secondary empire. Hotels, chain restaurants, gas stations, even car dealerships clustered near the exits, each one adding another line of revenue to a municipal budget that suddenly looked comfortable, confident, almost rich. Because the mall promised endless growth, cities planned around it. They widened roads, extended sewers, built new interchanges and traffic lights, and upgraded water lines to feed the sprinklers above every ceiling tile. Police and fire departments expanded coverage. School districts counted on that rising commercial tax base to pay for teachers, libraries, and playgrounds. The story was simple. The mall would pay the bill. Then the tenants left. Anchor stores like Sears and JCPenney shuttered. Foot traffic collapsed, and those valuations that once justified every ribbon cutting began to fall. When an appraiser comes back to a half-empty corridor, the tax assessment drops with it. The city collects less, sometimes millions less over a decade, but the obligations do not shrink. The roads still need plowing. The sewers still need to run. The fire hydrants in front of the boarded entrance still have to work when someone finally decides to light it on fire. Here is the quiet twist. As the mall gives less, it often costs more. Empty parking lots attract drag racing, vandalism, break-ins. Police get called to trespassing, to squatters, to domestic disputes in cars that use the dark edges of the property as a hiding place. Fire departments respond to arson in abandoned kiosks, to electrical faults in half-dead systems, to kids exploring the roof who misjudge a rusted skylight. Code enforcement officers spend years chasing absentee owners through shell companies, writing citations no one answers, preparing lawsuits no one wants to pay for. Across the country, municipalities now spend millions every year just to babysit these ruins, boarding up entrances, mowing just enough grass to avoid liability, hiring security to keep the building from becoming a full-time encampment, litigating with lenders trapped in complex mortgage structures. The property that once symbolized suburban wealth becomes a line item of pure loss, a ghost tax that never appears on the ballot but quietly shapes public life. Pattern interrupt. Imagine a city council meeting where no one is talking about the mall at all. They are talking about a hiring freeze for firefighters, a delay in replacing playground equipment, a decision to postpone repairs on a leaking school roof. On paper, the choices look unrelated. In reality, every dollar funneled into securing a dead mall is a dollar not spent on living neighborhoods. How many teachers? How many park upgrades? How many after-school programs are being traded away to preserve the legal fiction that this carcass is still an asset? It is an example of what happens when a failed retail experiment refuses to die. And the longer it lingers, the more desperate the proposals become, setting the stage for the next chapter. The scramble to resurrect these shells as something, anything, that can finally pay their way again. But long before the Hail Mary redevelopment plans and desperate zoning hearings, the real collapse began quietly, in the brightest, biggest boxes of all. There was a time when a mall did not exist without its anchors, when the entire financial life of the building revolved around those hulking department stores at each end of the corridor. Anchors were the keystones of the indoor empire. Sears, JCPenney, Macy's. They paid shockingly low rent per square foot, sometimes almost symbolic, yet in return, they delivered what mattered more than anything else in retail: bodies through the door. That foot traffic justified the higher rents on the jewelry kiosk, the teen fashion chain, the pretzel stand. Money flowed from the small tenants, but the power sat with the giants, because without them, nobody came. Let me take you back to the slow-motion fall of those giants. Sears, once the mail-order king that brought modern consumer life to rural families, spent decades drifting. As Walmart ate the low end and specialty chains carved away the high end, Sears tried to be everything and ended up as nothing in particular, a museum of forgotten categories under flickering fluorescent lights. JCPenney lurched from one reinvention to another: coupon addict, then coupon abolitionist, then awkward hybrid, alienating loyal shoppers without gaining new ones. Even Macy's, the survivor, was left managing a sprawling fleet of aging boxes in a world where more and more shopping happened on a phone. Because these anchors were so embedded in the mall's design and debt, every misstep had consequences. When Sears began closing hundreds of locations, it was not just a corporate retreat. It was a controlled demolition of the ecosystem around it. Foot traffic dropped on that wing, then across the property. Percentage rent tenants, the ones who paid a base rent plus a slice of sales, watched revenue slide, then complained, then left. The spreadsheet that once penciled out so cleanly suddenly did not work at all. Visually, the damage was impossible to ignore. A boarded-up anchor entrance turned one whole side of the mall into a dead horizon. Escalators that once spilled crowds into housewares now rose to locked metal grates. Hallways that had been bright and loud grew quiet, the soundtrack shifting from pop hits to the echo of a lone security guard's footsteps. If the big guys were leaving, what did that say about everyone else clinging to their leases? And at times inspiring, and at times chilling, the psychology flipped almost overnight. Shoppers stopped treating the mall as a destination and started treating it as a warning sign. Banks reappraised loans, cities rechecked their tax projections, owners scrambled to fill a 150,000 square foot hole with trampoline parks and seasonal Halloween outlets. It's an example of what happens when the keystones go first. Once the anchors fell, many malls discovered their apparent diversity of tenants had been an illusion. Everything was tied to the same failing giants. The next stage was not gentle decline. It was cascade failure, and for thousands of workers and whole neighborhoods, the real unraveling was just beginning. Cascade failure at the mall level was dramatic, but it was never just about one building. It was the visible crack in a much bigger fantasy, that America could keep adding more aisles, more parking lots, more food courts, and the demand would somehow materialize forever. There was a time when the numbers looked unstoppable. By the mid-2010s, the United States had roughly 24 to 25 square feet of retail space for every single person. Not only was that more than any other major country, it was multiple times higher than places with similar or higher incomes. Canada, Western Europe, Japan. They all had thriving consumer economies, but far less physical retail. America wasn't just well supplied, it was drowning in square footage. Let me take you back to how that empire of glass and drywall grew so fast. Cheap land at the suburban fringe, taxpayer-funded highways slicing through farmland, and zoning codes that eagerly separated homes from shops created a perfect construction machine. Developers could grab a cornfield off the new interstate, promise jobs and sales tax, and get a green light for one more regional mall, one more power center, one more strip. Older centers didn't need to be full. They just needed to be old enough that someone could argue the town deserved something newer. So the country kept building. Lifestyle centers with fake main streets, outlet villages an exit or two farther out, open-air plazas with fountains and yoga on Saturdays. Each new project went after the same pool of money, the same middle-class families, the same chain tenants. The result was competitive cannibalism. Higher-income shoppers drifted to the shiny lifestyle center with the Apple Store and upscale dining, while the enclosed mall from 1987 watched its demographics age, its income profile fall, its tenant mix slide from national brands to local boutiques to vacancy. Inside, the story of those older malls was at times inspiring and at times chilling. Owners tried farmers markets, gyms, churches, even DMV offices to keep the lights on. But the math was turning. For decades, the assumption had been simple: build more retail, and people will spend more. Credit cards, two-income households, rising home values. Everything seemed to support the illusion of infinite demand. Then wages stagnated. The 2008 crash hit household balance sheets, and online shopping quietly stole the easiest, most repeatable purchases. A family that once spent Saturdays roaming 3 anchor stores now clicked "Buy Now" on a phone and stayed home. The square footage stayed the same. The transactions did not. It's an example of what happens when a system believes growth is a law of nature rather than a choice with limits. Many dead malls are not tragic accidents or freak economic storms. They are the predictable outcome of a country that built far more retail than its people, its wages, and its changing habits could realistically support. And as the overbuilt landscape ages, the question shifts from "Why did this die?" to something far harder. What, exactly, comes next for all that empty space? And then, just as the overbuilt landscape was starting to creak under its own weight, the floor dropped out. The year was 2008, and what had looked like a slow, manageable decline turned into a shockwave that tore straight through the heart of America's retail empire. Let me take you back to those months when the headlines felt like daily body blows. Job losses spiked into the hundreds of thousands per month. Home values that once felt like guaranteed wealth suddenly evaporated, and families who had treated the mall as a weekend habit began staring at credit card statements instead of window displays. There was a time when a trip to the food court and a couple of impulse buys felt harmless. Overnight, every latte and every new pair of shoes started to look like a threat to the mortgage. As money tightened, the math changed. Chains that had spent the 1990s and early 2000s chasing growth at any cost pulled out their spreadsheets and went hunting for dead weight. Underperforming locations were quietly marked for execution. Expansion plans were frozen, and every lease became a negotiation about who would absorb the pain. Strong malls could sometimes demand loyalty. Weaker malls, already bleeding foot traffic, were suddenly begging just to keep the lights on. Because of that ruthless triage, the weakest links snapped first. A marginal JCPenney here, a struggling Sears there, and suddenly an entire wing of a B or C class mall went dark. Smaller tenants that depended on anchor traffic watched their sales collapse and followed them out the door. What had been a slow drip of vacancies turned into something closer to a flood. Behind the scenes, another crisis was unfolding. The same credit machine that had financed endless expansions, renovations, and refinancing deals seized up. Lenders who once happily rolled over loans on aging properties now saw rising vacancies, falling rents, and consumers in retreat. They hesitated, then refused. Malls that needed fresh capital to patch roofs, rebrand, or buy time for a turnaround suddenly faced loan maturities with no lifeline attached. Construction crews felt it first. Renovations meant to reposition tired centers into lifestyle destinations froze mid-project, leaving exposed beams, half-finished food halls, and glossy renderings that now looked like cruel jokes. Employees learned their mall was closing not from a careful meeting, but from a local news segment or a leaked memo. Towns woke up to find their anchor store announcing a liquidation sale, with no replacement in sight and no plan for the yawning, windowless box about to be left behind. It's an example of what happens when an illusion meets a hard deadline. The crisis didn't invent e-commerce, changing tastes, or decades of overbuilding. It simply stripped away the fantasy that more time and more debt would finally fix everything. And as the dust settled, a harsher question emerged. If 2008 was only the first shock, what would happen when the next wave hit malls that were already half dead? When that next wave finally hit, it didn't arrive as bulldozers or boarded doors. It arrived as a browser window. Quiet, frictionless, ruthless. There was a time when the mall felt like advanced technology, climate control, Neon, a food court that made your local main street look primitive. But while those escalators hummed, a different empire was training people to shop without leaving the couch. Let me take you back to the early days of online shopping. Dial-up tones, pages that took half a minute to load, grainy product photos for books, CDs, maybe a hard drive if you were brave. It looked tiny next to a 2-story department store. Yet even in that clunky phase, e-commerce was teaching a new habit. Compare everything, read reviews, let the warehouse come to you. The trip to the mall stopped being an adventure and started looking like unpaid labor. At first, malls barely noticed. Online was niche, a sideshow. But then the phone in your pocket became a portal. Broadband spread, one-click payments arrived, and shipping times collapsed from weeks to days to order at breakfast, track it by lunch. The mall's promise of everything under one roof suddenly felt less magical when that roof was competing with a screen that offered 10 times the selection, 20 times the information, and none of the parking lot. Books were the first to slip away. A mall bookstore once justified an entire Saturday. Browse the aisles, grab a pretzel, maybe walk out with a bag. Then Amazon turned every title into a searchable line item, usually cheaper, usually in stock. Electronics followed. Big box anchors that had drawn crowds with DVD releases and flat-screen sales discovered their customers standing in the aisle, scanning barcodes, ordering the same TV for delivery. The mall still had the lights on, but the sale had already escaped through the Wi-Fi. Apparel was slower because fabric needs to be touched, sizes need to be tested. Yet returns got easier. Free shipping became normal, and fast fashion websites learned to mimic the thrill of the impulse buy with endless scrolling instead of endless hallways. As those categories migrated, the mall's strongest traffic engines, books, gadgets, fashion, began leaking just enough revenue to matter. And that was the cruel math. E-commerce didn't have to kill every sale. It only had to skim the top layer of transactions from malls that were already overbuilt, over-leveraged, and dependent on thin margins. Take away 10 or 15% of volume from a C mall anchored by a struggling department store, and the spreadsheets that once promised endless growth suddenly turned red. It's an example of what happens when a fragile system meets a new default. Because maybe the real Amazon effect wasn't only economic, it was psychological. The mall stopped being the automatic weekend destination, the place where families walked for entertainment, where teenagers learned the unwritten rules of money and power. Once the habit broke, once a Saturday could be click, delivered, done, those vast interiors started to feel eerily optional. And as we'll see next, optional spaces in American real estate don't fade gracefully. They rot in public. There was a time when a suburb outside Cleveland claimed a title that sounded almost ridiculous in its ambition. The largest mall in the world. Not Ohio's biggest, not the Midwest's biggest. The biggest, period. Randall Park Mall opened in North Randall in the mid-1970s with more than 2 million square feet of retail, hundreds of stores, 5 anchors, fountains, chandeliers, even an ice rink at one point. It wasn't just a mall. It was a climate-controlled promise that growth would never stop. Let me take you back to those opening years. The parking lots filled with American sedans, buses dropped off teenagers like clockwork, and local officials bragged that this single complex would anchor the tax base, the jobs, the very life of the village. Department stores like Sears and JCPenney played the role of royal courts, while smaller shops lined the corridors in tight formation, paying rent for the privilege of being near that traffic. Money flowed, the village hired more police, more services, and for a while it felt like a miniature empire built out of glass, tile, and food court grease. Then the math changed. Newer malls opened closer to newer suburbs, the regional population shifted, and North Randall's surrounding neighborhoods saw rising poverty and disinvestment. Crime headlines scared away some families, while aging anchors quietly trimmed hours and budgets. When the first big department store left, it wasn't just a vacancy, it was a signal. Because those anchors drove most of the foot traffic, every closure meant fewer customers, weaker sales, more darkened gates. By the 2000s, Sears was gone, JCPenney was gone, and Randall Park slipped into a long, uncomfortable limbo. For years, the building sat mostly empty, guarded and vandalized at the same time. Windows were smashed, copper was stripped, mold crept into ceiling tiles that once reflected polished shoes. Urban explorers filmed its silent escalators and collapsing food court, while local leaders wrestled with a brutal question: who would pour real money into a dead giant that still carried old debts and old expectations? The answer finally came from a very different kind of retailer. Randall Park Mall was demolished, and in its place rose an Amazon fulfillment center. A palace of retail became a temple of logistics. Where fountains once bubbled, conveyor belts now hum. Where teenagers once skipped class to wander aimlessly, workers scan barcodes on tight shifts, assisted by fleets of orange robots gliding under shelves. Packages arrive, get sorted, and leave within hours, destined for doorsteps whose owners may never know that their next-day delivery was assembled on the grave of a mall. His story is one of ruthless efficiency and control. Randall Park's story is one of ruthless efficiency and control applied to real estate. It's an example of what happens when the public square is quietly privatized, then quietly repurposed. Jobs returned, tax revenue improved. The land is productive again. But the trade is subtle. Thousands once strolled, lingered, people watched, learned the unwritten rules of money and power under skylights. Now the building's entire purpose is to move products, not people. Is that progress, or a quiet loss of shared space disguised as redevelopment? In the next examples, this same pattern repeats, but the outcomes feel very different depending on who is left outside the doors. Those locked doors and tinted glass hide more than empty corridors. Behind almost every dead mall, there is a second ghost, a maze of paperwork, shell companies, and distant investors that quietly decides whether anything will ever change. On the surface, it looks simple. In reality, the ownership story is one of layered bets, quiet write-offs, and a long game that rarely includes the community. There was a time when one name on the sign meant one owner in a nearby office. The original developer would build the mall, ride the wave of post-war prosperity, then, once the parking lot looked permanently full, sell the whole complex to a giant REIT, a real estate investment trust. The REIT would bundle dozens of malls into a single empire of climate-controlled shopping, collecting rent checks, promising endless growth, reassuring investors that American consumption would never slow down. Then it did. As sales softened and the weak properties started to drag on earnings, those same REITs quietly spun off the losers. Second-tier malls were peeled away into new entities with noble names and sinking balance sheets. When that did not work, distressed buyers stepped in, scooping up half-empty centers at pennies on the dollar, hoping for a miracle tenant or a future land play. The title changed hands, the press release sounded optimistic, but the roof kept leaking. Underneath all of this sits a quieter machine. CMBS, Commercial Mortgage-Backed Securities. Instead of one bank holding the mall's loan, the debt was sliced up. pooled with hundreds of other properties, and sold to investors from pension funds in Ohio to hedge funds in Singapore. The monthly mortgage payment flows into this pool, then back out again in carefully ranked slices. It is efficient when everything works. When a mall dies, it turns into a slow-motion legal puzzle. Because no single person really owns the loan, a special servicer steps in, charged with protecting the highest-ranking investors. Demolish the mall? Redevelop as housing? Accept a huge loss? Every option means someone, somewhere, eats the hit. Getting all those invisible stakeholders to agree is like trying to hold a town hall meeting with the entire global bond market. On the ground, the owner is often not a person at all, but a limited liability company with a mailing address in another state and a name like Maplewood Holdings LLC. The mall is a line item, not a landmark. Decisions get delayed, roofs are patched instead of replaced, and nothing truly happens until a loan matures, a tax bill goes unpaid, or a judge finally loses patience. Local officials push for redevelopment, residents demand action, but the title sits in limbo while lawyers trade emails. It is an example of what happens when physical life meets financial engineering. City halls pass glossy redevelopment plans, owners hold out for better terms, and neighbors drive past the same fenced-off husk year after year, wondering who, exactly, they are waiting on. Let me take you back to the paper trail itself next, because in many dead malls, that invisible trail is the real reason the building is still standing. But that paper trail doesn't exist in a vacuum. It runs straight through living rooms, backyards, and cul-de-sacs that were sold a very different dream. There was a time when a subdivision next to a regional mall was the suburban jackpot. Real estate brochures showed smiling families pushing strollers past fountains, promised walking distance to premier shopping and dining, and used the mall's glowing sign as a backdrop like it was a mountain range. Agents pointed at the food court and said, "That's your teenager's first job." They pointed at the department store and said, "That's where you'll buy every Christmas gift for the next 20 years. Let me take you back to those weekends when the parking lot was so full that homeowners charged cash to let cars spill onto their lawns." Not only did the mall mean convenience, it meant money, safety, and status, all bundled into one climate-controlled empire of glass and tile. A family could step out the front door, cross a landscaped berm, and be under skylights in 5 minutes. It felt permanent. Then the anchors left. First one, then another. Then the last big name quietly shuttered behind a store-closing banner that never came down. Because of that slow bleed of tenants and traffic, the same parking lots that once needed police to direct holiday crowds turned into empty concrete plains, perfect for loitering, illegal dumping, late-night donuts, and the occasional impromptu driving lesson from a nervous parent. The energy flipped. The lights went out. The space stayed. Neighbors noticed the shift long before the spreadsheets did. Trash bags tossed at the edge of the tree line. Graffiti creeping up the back of the old Sears. A single security truck circling acres of nothing, more ritual than deterrent. Homeowners associations filed complaints, held meetings, drafted letters. But how do you fix a corpse owned by a lender 3 time zones away? Because the mall's decline isn't just an eyesore, it hits the balance sheet of every house within view. Some properties lose their shine as walk to shopping turns into look at boarded-up entrances and weeds breaking through the asphalt. Appraisers start to talk about external obsolescence, a cold phrase for the moment when your backyard now faces a dead investment instead of a living landmark. For families who poured their wealth into a mortgage, that matters. And something else quietly disappears: identity. For decades, people told friends, "We live by the mall," as if that explained everything about their daily life, their routines, their place in the city. Now, the same sentence lands with an apology built in. They reach for new landmarks, new ways to say where home is, and often end up circling back to the ruin anyway, because everyone still knows it. So what happens to a community's self-image when its central landmark becomes a punchline, a warning, a place you tell your kids not to cut through at night? It's an example of what happens when physical power and financial power fall out of sync. The money leaves quickly, the building stays, and the people next door are left living on the edge of a corpse. And yet, not every neighborhood accepts that fate. In the next section, watch what happens when residents, city halls, and developers start trying to resurrect the body, or tear it apart for something entirely new. But inside the corpse, some people never left. Let me take you back to a corridor 3 turns away from the last working entrance, past a darkened Sears and a carousel wrapped in plastic. The skylights still leak a gray, reluctant daylight, and beneath them sits a narrow storefront with gold letters peeling off the glass. Ramos Jewelers, since 1987. There was a time when every unit on this wing was lit, when the Ramos family watched teenagers swarm past their window, when prom season meant overtime and easy money. Now, Mr. Ramos unlocks his gate to an audience of no one. His story is one of endurance and entrapment. He signed a 15-year lease back when this mall looked like an empire, spent his savings on custom cases, security glass, a gleaming sign that once screamed legitimacy. Because of those sunk costs, the math of leaving is brutal. New build-out, new deposit, new risk, at a time when the family's savings have thinned to almost nothing. So he stays, bound by a contract, by hope, and by the landlord's glossy packet promising that revitalization is coming next year. Day to day, the reality feels less like a business and more like a waiting room. The counters are polished, the diamonds still sparkle under tired fluorescent lights, but the foot traffic has collapsed into single digits. Some days, Mr. Ramos can count every customer on one hand and still have fingers left. Food court napkins roll by in slow motion, pushed by the same air handler that once battled crowds and now hums over empty tile. The mall office sends emails about potential redevelopment, about a medical campus, about new anchors. Nothing appears except more plywood. For tenants like this, the emotional toll hits harder than the financials. There is pride in surviving when everyone else folded, in being the last light on a dead wing, yet also a quiet shame in telling relatives. Yes, the store is still in that mall. Longtime customers walk in, look around at the boarded-up neighbors, and lower their voices as if entering a funeral. Mr. Ramos smiles, jokes that they now offer private shopping by default, but the silence after the laugh lingers. Because of that silence, every sale feels like a referendum on his life choices. When a loyal customer asks, "Are you staying here? Is it safe?" The answer shifts month to month, from confident to nervous to evasive. It's an example of what happens when macro trends, e-commerce, overbuilding, vanished anchors, collide with a single family's need to pay rent and keep the lights on. At times inspiring and at times chilling, the holdouts show how a dead mall doesn't just disappear. It drags its last tenants through a slow-motion bankruptcy, played out under buzzing bulbs, long after the wealth and power have walked away. And outside those gates, another drama is already forming. The people drawing up plans for what comes after the funeral. And outside those gates, another drama is already forming. The people drawing up plans for what comes after the funeral. But until the wrecking crews finally arrive, someone still has to babysit the corpse. Let me take you back to a Tuesday night shift, the kind that never makes it into the redevelopment brochure. The mall is technically open, but the parking lot looks like a forgotten drive-in. A few scattered cars, one flickering light, wind pushing fast food wrappers in slow circles. Inside, a single security guard unlocks the glass doors for the last salon still paying rent, nods to the clerk who knows his name, then begins the same ritual he repeats every night. Gates up for the pharmacy. Gates down for the wing that died in 2016 and never came back. There was a time when this place needed a whole team, radios crackling, crowds flowing, money pouring through every entrance. Now one guard walks miles of empty corridors, past shuttered food court stalls and mannequins staring out from behind dusty glass. The only sound is his own footsteps, the distant hum of the HVAC, and every so often, the sharp electronic chirp of an alarm triggered by nothing that makes sense. A door that never quite latches. A motion sensor that sees the wind. His tools still pretend this is an empire of commerce. A bank of cameras, half in color, half in greenish static, watching escalators that no one rides. A radio clipped to his vest that almost never speaks. A ring of heavy keys that jangles like a medieval jailer's, including keys to doors that haven't been opened in years. Behind some of those doors, forgotten back rooms with holiday decorations from 2003, inventory lists for brands that no longer exist, break rooms where family photos curl on corkboards under nicotine-yellowed ceiling tiles. Because ownership is afraid of liability, the guard is afraid of everything else. Every incident becomes a potential courtroom exhibit. Patrol logs checked to the minute, broken locks photographed, burned-out bulbs suddenly important. If a kid sneaks in to film an urban exploration video and falls through a soft spot in the floor, questions will come fast. Why was that wing accessible? Why wasn't that door sealed? Why is this ruin still open at all? It's an example of what happens when the wealth and power leave, but the legal responsibility doesn't. So his story is one of boredom laced with a thin wire of fear. Hours of nothing, then a shape on a monitor that shouldn't be there. A trespasser slipping in through a loading dock. A homeless couple nesting behind an old anchor store. Or worse, an unexplained noise from a darkened corridor where the skylights have been blacked out and the air feels heavier than it should. He walks toward it anyway, keyring in hand, the only person who knows every inch of this place. And in more than one dead mall, that's the unsettling truth. The last complete map of the ruin lives inside the head of the guard, paid to make sure no one else ever sees it. Until one night, even he finds a door he doesn't remember. He pushes that door open and finds something the blueprints never mentioned. Heat. A faint current of warm air, humming through old ducts, still bleeding in from the one anchor store that never shut its boilers off. In a landscape of frozen parking lots and locked shelters, a half-warm concrete shell becomes something else entirely. It becomes a question of survival. There was a time when these places were climate-controlled dreams for the middle class, tuned to a perfect 72 degrees so families could wander for hours. Now, the same insulation that once protected wealth and merchandise traps a different kind of life inside. Large, partially heated, semi-secure, shielded from wind and snow, a dead mall is an accidental refuge for anyone with nowhere else to go when the temperature drops and the shelters are full. People do not walk through the front doors. They slip in through the gaps. A propped service entrance where a contractor forgot to let it latch. A loading dock gate that no longer quite meets the ground. A broken bathroom window behind an abandoned food court. Forgotten access points in mechanical rooms, where the only witnesses are rusted pipes and a fire extinguisher that expired 10 Christmases ago. Security knows this. Owners know this. And here, the story turns, at times inspiring and at times chilling. Because the same guard who once chased teenagers away from the arcade is now under orders to sweep stairwells, boiler rooms, and back corridors, to log every sleeping bag, every candle, every human being trying to stay alive without paying rent. Trespass is trespass, the lawyers remind everyone. Insurance, liability, corporate risk. The language is cold, but the people are not. Shelters in the nearest city are overwhelmed or miles away with no late-night bus. So the mall becomes the in-between. Not legal housing, not quite abandoned, just empty enough that someone might risk a week inside. Yet these improvised bedrooms come with their own dangers. Extension cords snaked from half-dead outlets, small fires in metal trash cans, propane heaters meant for open air, burning in rooms with no working alarms. It's an example of what happens when a building is left to rot faster than the memories inside it. Ceiling tiles sag with hidden leaks. Escalators jam mid-step. Railings loosen on upper levels. Spaces never meant for habitation offer no sanitation at all, only dark restrooms with dry traps and water shut off at the main. The empire of consumption is gone. The plumbing schedule went with it. Then comes the pattern the spreadsheets never modeled. A structure decays, a community frays, and people slip into the cracks between them. When a society can afford to keep millions of square feet of retail in limbo, yet cannot guarantee a bed on a freezing night. What does that say about its priorities? Because the mall is not the only thing quietly collapsing here. And in the next section, the camera will pull back to show who is trying to rebuild something from these ruins, and who is still cashing checks from far away. Because the mall was never just a balance sheet. It was a training ground, a stage, a low-budget simulator for real-life running quietly under fluorescent skies. There was a time when a teenager's real social network wasn't an app, it was a food court. Let me take you back to that world for a moment. This was where 13-year-olds learned to walk in a pack without a parent, to read the unspoken rules of public space, to handle a $20 bill like it was serious money and decide between fries now or a t-shirt later. It was where someone practiced that first awkward hello, circled past the same store 3 times, hoping the right person would look up, and finally learned that rejection in public didn't make the ceiling fall in. Because the mall offered something rare in American life, unsupervised time that was not truly unsupervised. Security guards hovered, employees watched, parents were somewhere under the same roof, but just far enough away. It was safe enough to let small mistakes happen. A lost wallet, a missed meetup, a phone call from a payphone outside Sears. Tiny failures, cheap lessons. And unlike gated communities or private clubs, the mall pulled different worlds together. Kids from apartment complexes arrived on the bus. Minivans poured in from cul-de-sacs. Retirees from modest bungalows walked the same polished floors as lawyers' families. Cross-class mixing happened in line at Auntie Anne's, on the bench by the fountain, along the rail overlooking the ice rink. Money still mattered. Power still decided who shopped where. But under that roof, everyone shared the same air conditioning and the same Cinnabon smell. Around them, a whole calendar of quiet rituals turned these places into more than retail. Mall-walking seniors did laps at dawn, turning corridors into indoor tracks long before wellness became an industry. Saturday family outings meant strollers, pretzels, and a stop to throw pennies into a fountain that was never going to grant any real wish, but marked the weekend as clearly as church once had. Holiday photo lines coiled past window displays, not because people needed another print, but because standing there together proved the year had happened. Now, much of that social life has migrated to screens. Group chats, online games, social media feeds create constant contact, yet demand almost no shared space with strangers. A teenager can have hundreds of connections and never once navigate a crowded escalator or make eye contact with someone they will never see again. It's efficient, personalized, frictionless, and at times inspiring, and at times chilling. So when the mall dies, what replaces that casual, low-stakes public togetherness? It's an example of what happens when a culture stops practicing how to be around people it did not choose. The empire of indoor shopping collapses, but the need for a common stage does not. In the next section, the camera will follow the people trying to build new stages from these ruins, and the ones quietly turning them into something far more controlled. But hold on. Before declaring the empire of indoor shopping dead and buried, look at the other America hiding in plain sight. The one where the parking lots are full, the escalators are loud, and the line for bubble tea wraps past a Louis Vuitton window. There was a time when every suburb dreamed of this, but now only a few properties still live it every weekend. Drive into Tyson's Corner outside Washington, or Aventura in South Florida, or the Mall of America in Minnesota, and the mood is different from the dead shells you've just seen. The air smells like designer perfume and fryer oil, not mildew. Teenagers film TikToks under LED ceilings. Families drag luxury shopping bags past indoor roller coasters, and somewhere a DJ is playing for a sneaker drop. These places did not survive by accident. They survived by doubling down. Their story is one of demographics and discipline. Wealthy zip codes, dense populations, highways feeding them from every direction. Owners poured money into renovations, ripped out dated fountains, added glass, greenery, skylights, rooftop dining. They packed in tenants that Amazon cannot easily simulate: escape rooms, climbing walls, aquariums, celebrity chef restaurants, Korean barbecue, medical spas. A mall that used to sell objects now sells a day of someone's life. Notice the pattern. Where the customer base stayed strong and the landlord stayed restless, the mall kept its pulse. Management chased new brands, negotiated short leases, tested pop-ups, swapped underperforming chains for buzzy concepts. They treated the floor plan like a living organism, pruning and grafting, never letting whole wings go gray. At times inspiring and at times chilling, it's a kind of controlled ecosystem, curated from above. Then there are the hybrids. Properties that stitched apartments to the old anchors, slid mid-rise offices over former parking lots, and turned food courts into food halls, with local vendors performing authenticity for suburban professionals. Let me take you back to a dead Sears box that now holds a co-working hub, a gym, and a medical clinic, all feeding daily traffic into the remaining shops. Same concrete shell, completely different life. Set one of these thriving centers next to a dead mall on Google Earth, and the contrast feels almost unfair. Same vintage architecture, same beige bones, sometimes even the same original developer. What changed was not the tiles on the floor, but the timing, the neighborhood's income, and how ruthlessly the owner adapted when e-commerce hit. Because of those choices, one escalator carries strollers to a rooftop bar, while another, in a different zip code, groans into the dark. So the story is not malls are dead. It's an example of what happens when a very specific vision of the mall dies. The passive rent-collecting box, the one-size-fits-all chain gallery. What replaces it depends on decisions being made right now by city councils, lenders and landlords, walking through echoing corridors with renovation plans in hand. And that is where the ruins become interesting again. In the next section, the camera will follow the people trying to force new lives into old shells, and the ones quietly turning them into engines of an even more invisible kind of power. There was a time when the only reason to walk into a mall was to spend money. Now, in some cities, the biggest line forms outside the former Sears at 7 a.m., not for Black Friday deals, but for blood tests and chemotherapy. Behind those boarded-up display windows, entire medical empires are quietly taking shape. Anchor boxes that once sold refrigerators and wedding china are being gutted, replumbed, and reborn as outpatient campuses, imaging centers, physical therapy gyms, and specialty practices stacked across old retail floors. The escalator that used to carry families toward holiday sales now delivers them to oncology on 2 and radiology on 3. Healthcare likes mall bones. Huge open floor plates make it easy to carve out operating rooms and MRI suites without the constraints of a cramped downtown hospital tower. The seas of surface parking that once signaled peak consumer power now promise something more practical. A place for patients with limited mobility to pull up close, step out, and walk a few yards instead of a few city blocks. Transit lines that were built to funnel shoppers in on weekends now bring in dialysis patients on Tuesday mornings. Zoning helps too, because these properties were already approved for high-traffic uses. A medical operator can move in without the political warfare that comes with building a brand new hospital from scratch. It's an example of what happens when the skeleton of one empire is perfectly suited to host the organs of another. And it's not just medicine. Let me take you back to a different kind of conversion. The Dead Mall, whose food court is now a community college cafeteria, where nursing students cram for exams under the same skylights that once advertised combo meals. Classrooms fill former shoe stores. A big box anchor becomes a public library branch, a workforce training center, or a DMV. Private consumption zones quietly mutate into quasi-public service hubs, where you can renew a driver's license, attend GED night classes, and pick up free legal aid in the same corridor that used to sell fast fashion. For local residents, the emotional math is complicated. The same hallway where teenagers once loitered and flirted now hosts cancer support groups and ESL classes. People who remember lining up for Santa photos return years later to sit in infusion chairs or to watch their children walk into a tutoring center that used to be Claire's. At times inspiring and at times chilling, these new lives carry a strange aftertaste of nostalgia and loss. So what is this, really? A downgrade or an evolution? The mall stops being a temple of buying and becomes a place where bodies are repaired and minds are trained, where wealth is no longer displayed in shopping bags, but in access to care and education. In the next section, the camera will step inside one of these hybrids and ask who truly benefits when the ruins of retail become the new infrastructure of everyday life. So when the cameras step outside that hybrid mall, they don't find a town square or a food court waiting. They find the new face of American consumption, a vast windowless box rising out of scraped earth and cracked asphalt, like a cargo ship that accidentally docked in the suburbs and never left. There was a time when the biggest buildings near a mall were movie theaters or office parks. Now, in city after city, the dominant silhouette is a fulfillment center. Blank concrete walls stretching for what feels like miles, rows of loading docks like gills along the side, and a constant rotation of trailers backing in, unloading, vanishing. No fountains, no skylights, no atriums, just trucks, asphalt, and timing. Let me take you back to the inside of one of these places. The doors close behind the workers, and everything is motion. Conveyor belts snake overhead, bins slide past scanners, yellow robots trace perfect paths on polished floors, and human beings stand at stations, hands moving in tight, repetitive arcs. Every movement is logged. Every pause is measured. Every second is money. It's the same empire of consumption the mall once served, but now the choreography is written by algorithms. On paper, the purpose hasn't changed. Malls and fulfillment centers both exist to move goods from companies to consumers, to turn desire into revenue and inventory into wealth. But where the mall wrapped that process in music, climate control, and public life, the fulfillment center strips it down to pure logistics. The customer never enters. The public never lingers. The transaction is invisible, arriving in a cardboard box on a porch that never saw the warehouse that made it possible. That invisibility hides a brutal trade. Retail associates once walked polished tiles, answered questions, folded shirts, chatted with regulars, and watched families grow up one purchase at a time. Now those same jobs are often warehouse roles, scanning barcodes, racing timers, chasing pick rates, monitored by handhelds that buzz when they fall behind. Because of this ruthless optimization, workers are no longer hosts in a shared social space. They are data points in a machine that never sleeps. Communities are told it's a fair exchange. The dead mall becomes jobs, tax revenue, a new economic anchor. But the price is constant truck traffic, diesel noise at 3 a.m., and the quiet disappearance of a place where teenagers once loitered, seniors once walked laps, and parents once let their kids run ahead without fear. It's an example of what happens when efficiency wins every argument and public life loses without a fight. The temples of American middle-class life have finally been downgraded to back-end infrastructure, efficient, sealed, and closed to the very public they serve. Yet behind those walls, the story isn't just about packages, it's about people, injury rates, quotas, and quiet rebellions. In the next section, the camera will follow one worker's shift and ask a dangerous question. What happens when the mall dies, but the machine behind it keeps speeding up? The camera steps outside the warehouse doors and into another kind of machine, the American suburb, where the carcass of a dead mall is being carved into homes. Not only was this once a monument to money and middle-class power, it was engineered with almost military precision. Highway interchanges, turning lanes, sewer lines, oceans of parking, all of it designed to feed an empire of shopping. Now, those same ingredients make it prime real estate for something very different. Dead mall sites sit on huge parcels, already wired for water, power, and transit. There was a time when developers begged cities for that kind of blank canvas. Here, it's already paid for, just sitting behind chain link and fading space-available banners. Close to jobs, close to freeways, often close to bus routes or light rail that were built to serve the weekend rush. So the new playbook is simple, and at times inspiring, and at times chilling. Tear down the empty Sears box. Leave the skeleton of the old food court for now. Then pour foundations for mid-rise apartments where minivans once circled for a spot. 5 stories of wood over concrete, wrapped in fiber cement panels, with balconies looking out over what used to be the north parking lot. Down at ground level, a coffee shop, a dentist, maybe a boutique gym. The rest becomes green. Pocket parks, dog runs, a walking path tracing the ghost of a ring road that once funneled Black Friday traffic. In some suburbs, the transformation is dramatic. A mall that barely employed a few dozen security guards and maintenance workers in its final years now houses thousands of residents, each paying rent, each buying groceries a short walk away. The story of a weekend shopping destination quietly flips into the story of a dense, everyday neighborhood. It's an example of what happens when the same land that once sold televisions and perfume is suddenly asked to provide shelter. But none of this happens without a fight. Zoning meetings stretch late into the night as neighbors line up at microphones, warning of traffic, of overcrowded schools, of the character of their community being erased. They fear height. They fear renters. They fear that poverty might move in next door. On the other side of the room, planners pointing to the alternative, a decaying hulk generating no tax revenue, attracting vandalism, quietly rotting in the middle of town. Sometimes the apartments win. Sometimes the dead mall wins by simply refusing to die on paper, trapped in loan documents and lawsuits. And sometimes the pattern interrupts in a stranger way. A former anchor store becomes a church, a call center, a county office, while the rest of the site waits for its verdict. So let me take you back to that childhood memory of walking through the mall with family. Then fast forward. A child born in one of these new apartments will grow up playing where cars once idled in holiday traffic. Will they know it as the old mall site, a story passed down like local folklore? Or will the memory finally vanish under fresh drywall and new lives? In the next section, the camera will go looking for the last traces to see how long the ghosts of retail can haunt a place after the signs come down. But in a lot of towns, those ghosts don't just fade. They dig in. There was a time when a mall wasn't just a building, it was the beating heart of local life, and that memory has its own kind of power. Let me take you back to the council chambers in any Midwestern suburb. On paper, the mall is dead, anchors gone, tax revenue gutted, roof leaking. Yet the public hearing is packed with people who remember prom photos on the escalators, Santa in the center court, the first job that felt like real money behind the orange Julius counter. They stand up, voice shaking, and say, "You can't just tear it down." They are not defending square footage. They are defending a story of who their community once was. Because of that nostalgia, mayors and council members hesitate. To older voters, approving demolition can feel like signing the death certificate of their own youth, their own family memories. The mall might be 80% vacant, but politically, it is still radioactive. No one wants to be the name in the headline blamed for killing a landmark, even if that landmark is already a hollowed-out empire of empty display cases and pigeons. And then there is the slow, grinding machinery of bureaucracy. Leveling 1,000,000 square feet of concrete isn't a quick swing of the wrecking ball. It means environmental assessments to see what leaked into the soil, asbestos abatement in the ceiling tiles and old floor glue, stormwater plans, traffic studies, permits that need 3 signatures, then 4 more. Every step costs real money, and every delay makes the dead mall linger another season, another election cycle, another year of half-lit parking lots. Behind the scenes, the owners are often in no rush either. Many of these properties are entangled in commercial mortgage-backed securities, managed by distant servicers who don't live anywhere near the food court. Sitting on a dead mall can be a strategy. Wait for the next boom, the next tax break, the next desperate city offering subsidies to turn retail ruin into housing, a medical campus, a fulfillment center. Until the numbers line up just right, the safest move is no move at all. So the result is a stalemate. Memory pushes one way, spreadsheets push another, and elected officials hover in the middle, terrified of making an irreversible call that will either waste public money or erase the last visible piece of a shared past. It's an example of what happens when a building is both emotionally priceless and economically useless. In many towns, the dead mall isn't just a building at all. It's a frozen argument between nostalgia, money, and the fear of choosing a future that can never be undone. And when that argument finally breaks, what replaces it can be strangely revealing. And when that argument finally breaks, another one begins. This time not in the food court, but in court. The dead mall stops being a place and turns into a case file, a stack of motions and exhibits where everyone claims to defend the community, the money, the future. On paper, it looks clean. In real life, it feels like watching a once busy empire dissolve into a custody battle no one really wins. There was a time when a mall dispute meant a tenant arguing over rent or signage. Now the conflicts are far more ruthless. Cities sue absentee owners over fire code violations, collapsing roofs, failing sprinklers. Owners counter by suing lenders over foreclosures, claiming the bank pulled the plug too fast, sabotaging any hope of rescue. Trapped in the middle, the last tenants sue both sides for unsafe conditions, documenting falling ceiling tiles, black mold in back rooms, and parking lots so dark they might as well be invitations. As the lawsuits pile up, so do the liens. Unpaid property taxes quietly attach to the title year after year. Contractors who boarded windows, pumped out flooded basements, or removed asbestos file their own claims when the checks bounce. Environmental regulators add fines for leaking oil from old transformers or chemicals seeping into the soil. Soon, the mall is worth less than the stack of obligations welded to its name, a monument to negative wealth in a landscape that once promised endless growth. Because of that crushing math, cities sometimes reach for what feels like the nuclear option: eminent domain. Officials argue that seizing the dead mall for public use, a school, a transit hub, a medical campus, is the only way to break the stalemate. Owners fire back that the valuation is an insult, that the government is using blight as an excuse to grab land on the cheap. It's an example of what happens when public frustration collides with private property rights, at times inspiring and at times chilling. Caught between those forces, judges quietly become the most powerful people in the mall's afterlife. From a bench hundreds of miles away, a single order can force a sale, approve demolition, or appoint a receiver, a kind of court-approved babysitter, to manage a property in limbo. One signature can unlock redevelopment. Another can freeze everything while appeals crawl forward. Let me take you back to the original dream of effortless consumption, then contrast it with this: attorneys arguing over who has to insure a building that no one really wants to enter. Meanwhile, the mall does not wait. Rain finds every gap in the roof. Mold blooms behind drywall. Vandals test doors, then walls, then entire anchor stores, blissfully unaware of filing deadlines and continuances. While the lawyers argue about who owns the corpse, the building keeps deciding its own fate. And what happens next depends on who finally blinks first. So let me take you back to a different weekend, not in a corpse, but in something more unsettling: a mall that is still alive. Saturday, 9:12 a.m. The parking lot at Maple Ridge Mall is half full, not empty and not overflowing, a perfect visual of American retail in 2026. Seniors and windbreakers circle the building in tight, determined laps, tracking steps on cheap fitness watches while the automatic doors are still locked. There was a time when those doors opened to stampedes. Now the first wave is a walking club that treats the concourse like an indoor track and the food court like a finish line. By 10, the lights are up and the building exhales. This is not a luxury palace. It is a mid-tier, beige-tiled, slightly scuffed community mall with one surviving department store anchor, a discount grocer bolted onto the side, and a carousel of tenants that never quite settles. National chains cling to the main corridor, flanked by scrappy independents with hand-lettered signs and family photos taped behind the counter. A local shoe repair lives next to a national sneaker brand. A nail salon shares a wall with a tutoring center. It looks improvised because it is. Outside, the adaptation is literal. Half the south parking lot is now a farmer's market under pop-up tents. Retired teachers sell honey. A family that used to run a diner now pushes breakfast burritos from a food truck. Money changes hands in small bills, and every purchase keeps someone's life from tipping over. The mall management, once obsessed with pristine asphalt and parking ratios, now hands out folding tables and extension cords. It is not an empire. It is triage. Inside, the dead spaces are not left to rot. A former clothing chain has been carved into community college classrooms, whiteboards bolted where mannequins used to stand. Students in hoodies slip past the pretzel stand, heading to intro biology, where clearance racks once groaned with fast fashion. Down the hall, a pop-up marketplace fills what used to be a mid-range home goods store, rotating local vendors on month-to-month deals, candle makers, vintage resellers, a guy selling refurbished game consoles. It is an example of what happens when the old model collapses, but the shell is too valuable to abandon. And emotionally, the difference from a dead mall is immediate. People greet each other by name. Kids swarm a soft play area that replaced a failing jewelry kiosk, hurling foam blocks while parents trade school gossip. A security guard bends down to tie a toddler's shoe. The air smells like Cinnabon, not mildew. Yet under the fluorescent hum, the precariousness is obvious. One more anchor gone, one more national tenant deciding this zip code no longer fits the spreadsheet, and the whole ecosystem shudders. Because of that fragility, every local event in the atrium, every craft fair and holiday choir and blood drive is less about nostalgia and more about survival. His story is one of empire and absolute power. This mall's story is one of holding on by its fingernails, at times inspiring and at times chilling. It shows a middle path between glittering success and total abandonment. The question is how long that middle can last when so many others have already slipped off the edge. But while that mall clings to life, the rest of the map has already been redrawn. There was a time when a single regional mall could claim an entire city's weekends, birthdays, and paychecks. Now, the empire of shopping has shattered into 100 smaller kingdoms, each efficient, each profitable, and each strangely empty of real connection. Let me take you back to a typical Saturday in the late 1990s. One building, one parking lot. Inside, teenagers, grandparents, young families, and lonely drifters all moved through the same climate-controlled maze. Today, that same Saturday is scattered. Groceries from a discount warehouse on the edge of town. Clothes from a fast fashion chain in a strip center. Electronics from a big box fortress across the highway. Everything else ordered from a phone on the couch, arriving in anonymous cardboard. Money did not disappear. It just stopped gathering in one place. E-commerce quietly siphons off categories that used to demand a trip. Books, toys, electronics, even bulk paper towels. Standalone big-box stores pull in car-dependent shoppers with low prices and brutal efficiency. Dollar stores and discount chains colonize rural crossroads and working-class neighborhoods, offering convenience at the cost of any lingering sense of occasion. And then, a few times a year, people still drive to a destination center. The outlet village, the luxury mall, the lifestyle plaza with fake streets and real valet parking. Instead of one shared stage, Communities now move through a fragmented set of small, specialized nodes that rarely overlap. The suburban parent doing curbside pickup at Target never bumps into the night shift worker grabbing frozen dinners at the dollar store. The remote worker ordering everything online never crosses paths with the teens who still treat the outlet mall as a backdrop for TikToks. The social experience that once came free with every errand has been quietly unbundled. Curbside pickup turned into a habit, then into an expectation, then into an invisible line that keeps people outside. Order on the app, park in the numbered spot, pop the trunk, drive away. No wandering, no overheard arguments, no chance meeting with an old classmate in the detergent aisle. Drive-through used to mean burgers and bank tellers. Now it means prescriptions, coffee, groceries, even mobile orders for big box chains that were once proud of their endless aisles. It is an example of what happens when an entire economy optimizes for speed and control. The result is at times inspiring and at times chilling. Same money, greater wealth, faster service, fewer reasons to share air with strangers. The irony is hard to miss. There have never been more ways to buy, yet fewer places where buying also means belonging. In chasing frictionless efficiency, what exactly did we delete from the map of everyday life? And who will finally notice that it is gone? There was a time when the mall map in the lobby was the closest thing many families had to a city plan. Today, in a dead mall, that same map is still there, yellowed under plexiglass, pointing proudly to stores that no longer exist, promising sales that expired 20 years ago. Walk down a sealed wing, and it feels like someone hit pause on American life around 1998. The old Gap logo still hangs in perfect corporate blue. A Suncoast video marquee advertises VHS box sets. Mannequins stand frozen in low-rise jeans and chunky platform sandals, staring through glass at a world that moved on to streaming, fast fashion, and same-day delivery. In one kiosk, a peeling poster shouts about a 500 free minutes cell phone plan, as if nights and weekends still mattered and data didn't exist. Because the interiors are sealed and the climate control often left half-running, decay moves strangely slowly. Carpet colors fade, but don't quite die. Fake plants gather a dignified layer of dust instead of collapsing. Cash wrap counters still hold point-of-sale terminals, receipt printers, even half-used rolls of promotional stickers. It looks less like a ruin and more like a shift change where everyone walked off at the same time and never came back. Let me take you back to what these spaces were designed to sell beyond shoes and pretzels. The Dead Mall is a time capsule of a very specific vision of the normal American family. The ads on the walls still show a nuclear household smiling under skylights, shopping bags in both hands, minivan keys dangling, everyone effortlessly middle class. The architecture assumes 2 cars in every driveway, endless Saturdays to browse, and an empire of consumption that would grow forever, one food court combo at a time. Because of that, walking through one now can feel at times inspiring and at times chilling. Inspiring because the colors, fonts, and background music are often the exact ones people grew up with. Chilling because those same food court chairs, those exact carpet patterns, those neon arcade signs now sit under flickering emergency lights, covered in grime. The life that once filled them has leaked out, leaving only the set. For anyone who spent childhood allowance money here, the emotional hit is surgical. The orange tile by the pizza place, the geometric teal and purple upholstery, the handwriting on a clearance sign written by someone who probably had no idea they were documenting the end of their own job. It's an example of what happens when a whole generation's everyday backdrop goes from normal to historical overnight. Future historians will have questions. Will they study these places the way we study ancient forums and markets, reading social hierarchies from food stalls and fashion? Or will they see them as an embarrassing monument to cheap credit and overconfidence, ruins that are barely a generation old? The real twist is this. Some of those historians are already walking the halls, cameras rolling, before the next phase of the story arrives, and tears all of it out. There was a time when a new mall ribbon cutting felt like a coronation, not just for the developer, but for the whole town. Mayors lined up with oversized scissors, chambers of commerce cheered, and families walked in under skylights convinced they were stepping into the future, not into a countdown clock. Let me take you back to that mindset. More square feet meant more prosperity. More parking lots meant more freedom. More anchors meant more tax revenue, more jobs, more choice. America built more shopping space per person than any society in history, and almost no one in power asked whether that empire of marble and drywall had a natural lifespan. The money was flowing, the demographics looked endless, and the models on the spreadsheet only went up and to the right. Then the numbers broke. E-commerce rose, wages stagnated, debt piled up, and by the mid-2010s, analysts were quietly admitting that a quarter, maybe a third of those malls were dead or dying. The same communities that once begged for a Sears or a JCPenney now paid for police patrols around empty anchors, paid to board up shattered doors, paid to fight fires in buildings that no longer sold a single thing. Because of the way the deals were written, the short-term winners were rarely the people left turning off the lights. Developers took fees up front, flipped properties into commercial mortgage-backed securities, moved on to the next project. Lenders collected interest while the good years lasted. When the music stopped, the mall's legal owner was often a trust in another state, managed by someone who had never walked those halls, but now negotiated, delayed, or simply walked away. The long-term costs fell on residents, on schools that lost tax revenue, on city councils forced to guard a ruin. At times inspiring, and at times chilling, the mall story is one of how incentives quietly shape landscapes. These places really did democratize access to goods. A kid from a working-class family could browse the same national brands as the wealthy, under the same climate-controlled dome, with the same food court fries. For a while, that felt like equality. But the moment the numbers stopped working, the same buildings were treated as expendable, written down on balance sheets, even as their roofs leaked onto police reports and utility bills. It's an example of what happens when a society builds physical monuments to a specific economic model and confuses the monument with the model itself. When the logic of endless growth falters, the marble does not dissolve. It just sits there, rotting politely. So the moral question is simple and ruthless. What responsibility exists to the life of the building after the life of the deal? When the empire of retail has moved on to warehouses, apps, and algorithmic storefronts, who answers for the shells left behind, and who decides what they finally become next? So if the life of the deal ends long before the life of the building, planners are left with the corpse. Dead malls are not just creepy backdrops for urban explorers, they are case studies in concrete, steel, and wishful thinking. There was a time when 1 million square feet of climate-controlled retail felt like inevitable progress. Now, those same shells sit in silence, asking a brutal question: what could have been done differently? Lesson 1 is flexibility. The classic mall is a single-purpose machine. Wide corridors, deep interior spaces, no windows, oceans of parking. Perfect for chain stores, terrible for anything else. When the anchors fail, the whole organism collapses. If zoning and building codes had demanded that these giants be designed for conversion, their fate would look very different. Higher ceiling grids, more natural light, structural bays that can be cut into apartments, classrooms, clinics. Not glamorous at the ribbon cutting, but priceless 20 years later. Because when a structure is locked into one function, it is locked into one economic story. If that story dies, so does the building. It is an example of what happens when a city bets on single-use megaprojects. One tenant mix, one revenue stream, one fantasy curve marching up and to the right. The moment e-commerce, changing demographics, or a recession slice through that fantasy, the empire of retail implodes, and the community inherits a stranded asset the original investors have already written off. Mixed use from day one is the opposite instinct. Retail at the base, offices above, housing wrapped around, maybe a medical wing or a community college satellite stitched in. Different lives, different rhythms, different sources of money sharing the same footprint. When retail slumps, residents still need a place to sleep. Patients still need appointments. Students still need classes. The parking lot that once only served Saturday shoppers can quietly morph into a bus hub, a playground, or a food truck court without the entire site going dark. Let me take you back to the planning meetings where many of these malls were born. The models on the table showed fountains, skylights, happy families with shopping bags. What they rarely showed were the people who already lived nearby, what they needed, what they feared. Community input was often reduced to a public hearing after the real decisions were made. The result was a landscape tuned to speculative demand curves rather than daily life. At times inspiring and at times chilling, the dead mall is what happens when residents are treated as consumers, not co-authors. So city planners now face a choice. Treat dead malls as embarrassing failures to be quietly demolished, or as thick textbooks written in faded signage and cracked terrazzo. Every vacant anchor store is a chapter on overbuilding. Every half-empty food court is a warning about chasing the same national chains. And in the next wave of development, from esports arenas to logistics hubs, the question becomes unavoidable. Will these new giants be any easier to reinvent when their moment finally passes? And that question is not abstract at all, because somewhere in the background of this story, there is a mall with your fingerprints all over it. There was a time when that place felt less like a piece of real estate and more like a second living room, a climate-controlled extension of family and friends and after-school freedom. Let me take you back to your own home mall for a moment. Not the idea of it, the actual sensory hit. The way the air changed as the doors whooshed open, from parking lot exhaust to cold, recycled perfume, the mix of pretzel salt and cheap cologne, the exact corner where everyone met up, under the glowing carousel, beside the fountain, next to that one store that always blasted the same 3 songs on loop. There was a time when that corridor felt like a tiny empire. Money flowing at every register, teenagers orbiting the food court like planets, parents pushing strollers past window displays that promised a better life in 30% off increments. First dates, first solo purchases, first moments of walking around without an adult and realizing, quietly, that power was shifting into your own hands. Now freeze the frame, then hit fast forward. What does that same space look like today? For some people watching, the answer is almost unsettlingly normal. The escalators still running, the anchor stores still lit, the parking lot still filling every December. For others, the escalator is frozen, the skylights are stained, and the only cars outside belong to security and a lone delivery truck that looks lost. Maybe the mall is already gone, demolished, scraped down to dirt, replaced by medical offices or a fulfillment center that ships the very products those old corridors once displayed. Same consumption, different geometry. It's an example of what happens when a country builds more shopping space per person than any society in history, and then quietly changes its mind about where shopping should happen. For many, the first real jolt comes from a late-night search, a drone video, an urban explorer's flashlight sweeping across the exact food court table where a first-job uniform was folded, or the last place the whole family ate together before life scattered in every direction. Because of that collision between memory and mildew, the reaction is not just nostalgia, it is a low-grade grief. So here is the invitation. Share those personal mall stories. The first paycheck blown at the record shop. The last visit, when half the gates were already down and someone finally realized, with a chill, that the empire was ending. Drop the names, the cities, the moments when the background of everyday life quietly cracked. These dead malls are not just cautionary tales about overbuilding and debt. They are at times inspiring and at times chilling reminders of how quickly places that shaped who we became can be abandoned. And as the video turns from memory to what comes next, the real question is whether the replacements will ever feel that personal again. So let's break the pattern for a moment. There was a time when a developer with a blank cornfield and a pile of money only had one obvious play: pour concrete, build anchors, fill the gaps with chains, and wait for the parking lot to overflow every Saturday. That formula is gone. But imagine this: the same land, the same budget as a 1980s regional mall dropped into 2026. No nostalgia allowed. What gets built instead? Picture the footprint of a classic mall, but the walls don't really mean anything anymore. Instead of a sealed box, the core is a flexible spine of space that can change its life every decade. 1 year, that big rectangle is retail. 10 years later, it's co-working and light manufacturing. 20 years on, it quietly shifts again into housing, clinics, or classrooms, not by demolishing it, but by designing the bones to move, slide, and be rewired without begging a bank for another fortune. Because the lesson of the dead mall era is brutal. Fixed boxes died when the world refused to stay fixed. So the new mall would be built like a stage set, not a cathedral. Demountable walls, shared back-of-house corridors, plug-and-play utilities, ceilings high enough for warehouse racks today, and loft apartments tomorrow. It's an example of what happens when a building is treated as a living system instead of a monument to one retail trend. And the anchors? Not department stores quietly bleeding out under fluorescent lights. The anchors would be experiences that can't be shipped in a cardboard box. A local food hall where immigrant families run stalls side by side, turning recipes into rent. Maker spaces with 3D printers, metal shops, and textile labs where small brands actually produce on-site. Performance venues that host middle school recitals on Thursday, punk shows on Friday, and community theater on Sunday. A clinic, a daycare, a library branch, maybe even a small public school wing pressed right up against the commercial life. The money flows differently too. Instead of one empire tenant dictating terms, dozens of small operators share risk, share logistics, share marketing. The parking lot, once an ocean of hot asphalt, becomes housing on the edges and a shaded plaza in the center, with just enough cars pushed underground to keep the balance between convenience and sanity. Digital integration stops being the enemy at the gate and becomes the nervous system. Click-and-collect hubs replace dead Sears loading docks, turning them into shared backrooms for every independent shop in the complex. A resident orders online. A worker in the micro-warehouse pulls the item. A local courier bikes it 3 blocks instead of a van, hauling it 3 states. The same software that crushed old retail suddenly props up new ones, handling inventory, payments, and customer data for tenants who could never afford that power alone. Then, a harder question cuts through the renderings like a flickering security light. What if the point of the place is not to maximize sales per square foot, but to maximize life per square foot? If that becomes the metric, the mall starts to look less like a shopping center and more like a semi-public town spine. Morning yoga in the plaza, co-working by day, night classes upstairs, food hall humming after dark, with seniors, teenagers, and young families all orbiting the same core instead of retreating to separate, private bubbles. Let me take you back to the dead malls for one last comparison. Those empty corridors show what happens when a space only knows how to do one thing. The next generation, if it ever really appears, will have to be ruthless about doing many things at once. And as the story moves from imagination to the real experiments already breaking ground, the question becomes whether any developer, any city, will actually take that risk. And while those visionary blueprints promise a new kind of mall, there was a time when the old kind already had something very advanced. A quiet surveillance state wrapped in food courts and fountain noise. Long before anyone worried about cookies or tracking pixels, the mall was watching. Let me take you back to that feeling of stepping through the sliding doors. The air changes, the light softens, and above the entrance, tucked into a dark dome, a camera tilts just enough to remind you it is there. Not only were there cameras in every corridor, there were loss prevention teams behind mirrored glass, radio chatter in back hallways, and private rules enforced by people with no badge, no oath, but a lot of power over your afternoon. Because malls were private property pretending to be public squares, they could ban skateboards, protesters, even teenagers who looked like they might not spend enough money. Security guards could shadow you, ask questions, escort you out, all without the formalities of an arrest. It was a controlled ecosystem, tuned to keep the right shoppers comfortable and the wrong behavior out of sight, at times inspiring and at times chilling in how normal it all felt. That logic never died. It just went online. Today, the cameras have turned into tracking pixels, the roaming guards into recommendation algorithms, the suspicious teen into a high-risk profile in a data broker's portfolio. Every scroll, every pause, every abandoned cart is logged and sold, not to keep you from loitering on a bench, but to keep you moving through an endless, invisible mall that stretches across your phone. On a website, the dress that follows you from page to page is the digital equivalent of a guard tailing you across 3 levels. The autoplay video, the personalized sale, the people like you also bought. Carousel are the new signage, the new food court smells, gently tugging you along. Whether in a physical corridor or a feed, the goal is the same. Keep you moving, buying, and predictable, while your behavior is quietly monitored, categorized, and fed back into the machine. Meanwhile, in the dead malls themselves, the old hardware lingers. When an anchor store finally shutters, its dome cameras are auctioned off, repurposed for a warehouse, a church, a self-storage empire built in the shell of retail wealth. The analog eyes get recycled or scrapped. The digital ones only multiply. So the mall may be offline, its escalators frozen, its food court in permanent poverty, but the system that built it has finally escaped the building. And as the story leaves these empty corridors and moves into the places that replaced them, the question is no longer whether anyone is watching, but what happens when watching is only the beginning. There was a time when the dead mall looked like an isolated failure, A weird local embarrassment with a leaky roof and a fading logo. But walk those silent corridors long enough, and another picture appears. This is not just a ruin. It is a rehearsal. Because the mall is not alone. All across the landscape, other overbuilt dreams are starting to flicker. Office parks that once promised lifetime careers now sit half-lit as remote work turns cubicles into ghost rows of ergonomic chairs. Coastal condo towers, sold on sunsets and certainty, face insurance maps creeping inland as sea levels rise. 6-lane arterials and endless parking lagoons bake in the heat, engineered for a car empire in a warming world where asphalt becomes a liability every summer. The Dead Mall is an early exhibit in a larger museum of stranded assets. Money was poured into the ground, concrete was poured on top of it, and the result no longer fits the life around it. The leases are long, the loans are longer, the legal structures are intricate, and yet the basic problem is simple. Reality moved. The building did not. It just sits there, physically massive and financially stuck, an example of what happens when yesterday's certainty refuses to admit today's climate, technology, or demographics. Let me take you back to the language investors used. Class A. Prime location. Irreplaceable asset. The same phrases that once surrounded 1980s supermalls now orbit new objects of faith. Data centers packed with servers, humming away in floodplains and fire zones. Luxury towers rising in cities that are quietly shrinking, betting on a future population that never arrives. Stadiums and arenas financed on optimistic projections, wrapped in projections of endless sellouts and permanent hype, even as the surrounding neighborhood cannot afford a ticket. His story is one of marble floors and synchronized fountains. Theirs is steel racks and blinking LEDs. Different aesthetics, same belief. This can only go up. Until it doesn't. Until the water table rises, the tax base erodes, the audience moves online, and what was sold as an unshakable asset becomes another locked door with a security guard and a maintenance crew keeping up appearances. So the Dead Mall asks a rude question. Which of today's inevitable growth stories will age as poorly as those brass railings and pastel food courts? It is at times inspiring and at times chilling to realize how quickly certainty expires. The same confidence that filled every storefront with branded light now fills pitch decks for climate-exposed resorts and highway expansions through regions already gasping in the heat. These places are not just curiosities for urban explorers. They are warning signs about how power imagines permanence, how money hardens into concrete, and how families and communities are left to live inside the ruins of outdated bets. And as the camera finally leaves the mall behind and moves toward what comes next, the real question is whether anyone is willing to learn from a building that can no longer lie about what it is. So as the camera pulls back from that last ruined food court, it's worth walking the whole corridor again, end to end. There was a time when these places were not punchlines or urban exploration backdrops, but the front edge of American life. Let me take you back to the post-war boom, when highways were fresh, gas was cheap, and the dream was a house with a yard and a parking space right outside the mall. Developers carved cornfields into parking lots, raised climate-controlled cathedrals to money and convenience, and promised that under one roof a family could eat, shop, flirt, work, and wander without ever stepping into the rain. Not only were they selling shoes and pretzels, they were selling safety, predictability, a middle-class empire sealed behind glass. Then the cracks began. Slowly at first, then all at once. Overbuilding turned every suburb into a competition of nearly identical corridors. e-commerce siphoned off the boring purchases. Demographics shifted, wages stalled, and those endless spreadsheets that assumed growth forever met the reality of 2008. When the crash hit, anchors failed, loans soured, and a lot of those temples of consumption were revealed as very expensive boxes with nobody left inside. Rolling Acres in Akron showed what happens when that process runs to the end. Anchors gone, interior gutted, snow falling through a collapsed roof while security still circled the perimeter. Dixie Square in Illinois went further, morphing from a proud local hub into a Hollywood car chase set, and finally into a pile of rubble that even the demolition crews seemed reluctant to finish. Randall Park in Ohio, once one of the largest malls on Earth, became a quiet maze of dead storefronts and dark escalators before its rebirth as a fulfillment center, trading window displays for conveyor belts. Around them, hundreds of anonymous dead malls repeated the same story without ever going viral. The names changed, the carpet patterns changed, the math did not. Because of that math, workers lost stable schedules and familiar co-workers. Small business owners watched decades of savings vanish with a lease. Security guards patrolled emptier and emptier hallways, then watched as squatters, teenagers, and urban explorers moved into the void. Different lives, different motives, but all pulled into the gravity of the same slow collapse. Now those bones are being reused. Medical campuses slide into former anchor boxes. Apartments grow where department stores once measured out prestige. Some shells turn into schools, churches, call centers, or city offices. Others, like Randall Park, become nodes in a new logistics network, where the public is gone, but the packages never stop arriving. His story is one of concrete, credit, and confidence, at times inspiring and at times chilling, because malls were both dream and trap. They promised wealth and belonging while locking communities into a single bet on endless growth. It's an example of what happens when power treats expansion as destiny instead of choice, and the next sections will follow what rises or fails when those bets finally come due. That bet didn't just happen in distant boardrooms. It happened in your zip code. There was a time when every region had a good mall, and the one everyone's mom warned them about after dark. Now the map looks different, and that map is quietly telling a story about money, power, and who gets left behind when an empire shrinks. So, let me take you back to your own mental atlas. Picture the mall that still feels alive. Full parking lot on Saturdays, a half-decent food court, maybe a medical clinic or DMV tucked where a department store used to be. Then picture the one that's hanging on. One anchor gone, weird tenants in the gaps, more walkers than shoppers. Finally, picture the one that's already crossed over. Locked doors, papered windows, maybe a lone discount store glowing in a sea of dark glass. Those three sites are not random, they're barometers. The thriving mall often sits near new highways and fresh subdivisions, tracking rising incomes, younger families, and a tax base local politicians are desperate to please. The struggling one usually marks a place where the middle class is thinning out, where online orders and big box strips peeled away just enough traffic to keep the lights on, but not enough to fix the roof. The dead mall is the blunt instrument of the story, a monument to promises that outlived the paychecks. Because the US built more retail square footage per person than any society in history, overbuilding was inevitable. But which centers die first is not. It's an example of what happens when demographic change, e-commerce, and political will collide. Anchors like Sears and JCPenney vanish, investors quietly walk away, and the community discovers the land under its social life is owned by a shell company 3 time zones away. But these ruins are not only mirrors of macroeconomics, they're mirrors of personal habit. Every time a package arrives instead of a visit to a local store, every time a third-place hangout is traded for a phone screen, a tiny vote is cast. One vote doesn't matter. Millions, over years, hollow out the corridors where teenagers once wandered and retirees once walked laps before breakfast. That doesn't mean anyone should feel guilty for liking convenience. It does mean the next dead mall in your town is asking a question. What kind of shared spaces are still worth the drive? Dead malls are not just about the past. They are active, decaying billboards for the future, whispering that if old gathering places vanish and nothing replaces them, the default setting becomes isolation with same-day shipping. No single person can march into a fading mall and reverse a decade of compounding debt and demographic flight. But each person can decide which places to show up for, to invest in, to fight, to keep alive. The final question is not, can you save a mall? But what exactly are you willing to let die without a fight? And the next section follows what happens when communities answer that question out loud. So let me take you back to that first image, to the escalator humming to nowhere. At the start, it looked like a glitch, a mechanical habit the building had never quite unlearned. Now it reads like a thesis: momentum without destination, motion for its own sake, growth without a plan for what happens when the ride ends. There was a time when those same steps carried whole families upward into a glowing atrium, when the soundtrack was Mariah Carey and the smell was cinnamon pretzels and new leather. Today, the handrail still moves, quietly obedient, past peeling vinyl, past a 50% off banner frozen mid-season, past a skylight stained brown from a leak no one bothered to fix. The machine kept its promise. The empire that built around it did not. Watch the montage in your head. A holiday Saturday in 1997. Parking lot full. Minivans circling. Kids in puffy coats dragging their parents toward Santa's village. Then jump cut to now. The same corridor. Tiles cracked. A raccoon nesting in the drop ceiling, its claws scratching where Christmas carols used to echo. It's an example of what happens when a culture bets everything on consumption, then quietly walks away when the receipts stop justifying the rent. Back then, the line to see Santa wrapped past the food court, parents juggling camcorders, and mall-brand hot chocolate. Today, that food court is a geometry of loss. Chairs stacked, kiosks stripped, a lone soda machine humming beside a trash can that hasn't been emptied in months. Where there was laughter and spilled fries, there is dripping water in a darkened atrium, each drop ticking down the seconds on someone's long-forgotten loan. Because of that bet on endless expansion, on more square footage, more anchors, more parking, you now get dead malls as the logical aftermath. Not a mystery, a ledger. When money, power, and optimism built more shopping space per person than any society in history, the story was always going to end with winners, losers, and ruins that no one budgeted to maintain. Some of these ruins will be reborn. A few will finally become apartments, fulfillment centers, medical campuses, stitched back into daily life by new kinds of demand. Others will linger as legal ghosts, trapped in commercial mortgage bonds and zoning fights, too expensive to fix, too costly to erase. The memories will live on in grainy home videos, in urban exploration clips, in half-remembered teenage nights that feel, at times inspiring, and at times chilling, like scenes from someone else's movie. And so the last gate rolls down. The security grill rattles, locks, and the lights click off. In slow sequence, leaving exit signs and that faint mechanical hum. The building waits, patient, indifferent, to see what story it will be forced to tell next: housing, warehouse, sanctuary, or something stranger. Because the escalator is still moving, and in the next section, you'll see who dares to step on. The escalator is still moving, and this is where you step on. Not into this mall, into yours. There was a time when every town bragged about its new shopping temple, its own climate-controlled empire of food courts, fountains, and payphones. Now, in a lot of those same towns, the only thing bragging is the wind whistling through a cracked automatic door that never quite shuts. So let me take you back to your local version. Maybe it is already dead. Maybe it is just dying in slow motion under fluorescent lights. In the comments, turn this video into a living archive of ruins. Name them all. Drop a photo from an old phone. Tell the story of the last anchor store closing, the final Christmas when half the decorations never went up, the weird karate studio and church that moved into the old Sears. One mall is a curiosity. 1,000 shared stories start to look like a system diagram, because behind every dead mall is a family timeline. His story is one of first paychecks at the food court, first dates in the movie theater, first cheap prom photos in that mirrored elevator. Talk to the older people in your life before those memories vanish faster than the signage. Ask parents or grandparents what that place meant when it opened, when parking lots were full and wages could actually buy what the window displays promised. Capture the way their faces change as they remember, and notice what they miss. The clothes, the freedom, the feeling of being in public without being a product. In a world that keeps pushing daily life onto screens, small physical spaces matter more, not less. So support the third places that are still alive. The library branch that smells like paper and dust instead of perfume samples. The park where teenagers loiter for free. The independent cafe where the Wi-Fi is strong, but the point is that anyone can sit, read, or just exist without an algorithm. It is an example of what happens when a society remembers that not every square foot has to justify itself in rent. This channel's story is not really about malls or even about money and real estate. It is about the hidden histories and unintended consequences of the systems everyone lives inside, at times inspiring and at times chilling. From cathedrals of consumption to fulfillment centers, from dead retail to whatever replaces it, every abandoned corridor is a clue. So, if this journey through America's forgotten structures made you see your own town differently, press like so the algorithm knows this story is not finished. Subscribe to join the next descent, and then keep walking with the channel into the next deep dive episode waiting on screen now. Think of it as the next corridor in this empire of ruins, where the buildings are rotting, but the stories refuse to die.